There has never been a better time to be vegan. It's never been easier to move in a vegan direction. My name's Michelle Olander, and I'm here every week to bring you actionable plant-based tips, encouragement, and vegan inspiration, all to help you veg your best. Episode 156, Lifestyle Medicine at Home with Dr. Janel Gordon. Welcome, my veg heads, and welcome, my veg your besties. We have a great conversation today with a great medical guest. Lifestyle medicine is her world, and we're going to be talking about that. Lifestyle medicine is a medical specialty that uses therapeutic lifestyle interventions as the primary modality to treat all kinds of chronic conditions that include, they're not limited to, but they include cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. Lifestyle medicine certified clinicians are trained to apply evidence-based, whole-person prescriptive lifestyle changes to treat and, when used intensively, can often reverse some of the conditions we're talking about. And applying the 6 pillars, we'll talk about those, the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine means whole food, plant-predominant eating, physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, avoidance of risky substances, and positive social connection. These are the pillars to provide an effective prevention and treatment for some of these conditions. So today's guest, I'm so excited to present her to all of you, is Dr. Janel Gordon. And she came to our attention at the Vegan Women's Summit earlier in the year. And I think you're going to be so interested in hearing her personal story, as well as her ideas of how we can implement some of the best practices recommended through lifestyle medicine when we're at home, when we're with our own family, when we're making our own decisions. And I particularly love Dr. Gordon's advice about how we can communicate more effectively with our current primary care provider. Well, there's a lot more in this conversation, so let's not waste another minute. Dr. Janel Gordon, welcome to Veg Your Best podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to this conversation, Dr. Gordon. We love featuring some of the people we learned about through the Vegan Women's Summit this year in New York City. And I know you were on a panel about plant-based, whether food can be medicine. And I want to know a little bit about how someone who works so hard, goes through medical school, becomes a physician, and you've chosen something like lifestyle medicine to devote your professional work to. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure, yes. So my journey started many years ago. I have a strong family history of multiple chronic medical conditions. Most prominent is type 2 diabetes, as well as high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, some kidney disease, and high cholesterol. So it was always very important to me to focus on nutrition, and I thought that I was doing a great job with that. And I'd say that my own personal nutrition has evolved over the years from childhood through high school, undergraduate, and then medical school. I got to residency and I started to fine tune a little bit, but practically was eating similar to how I had in medical school. However, when I finally got out into practice and I started seeing patients on my own, and I'm telling them, hey, you need to eat healthier, you need to move more, it didn't really seem like that was making a difference. And honestly, the more questions they asked, I felt like I didn't have anything else to give them except prescribing medications. And that would help somewhat, but it didn't seem to really solve their problems. And as we all know, there are side effects with multiple medications. And so you prescribe one and maybe they end up with another symptom. You may need to prescribe another medication. And I just felt like I was getting nowhere with it. So I actually had a patient who came in to see me one day and we needed to talk about her recent blood work, and her cholesterol had gone up significantly. She always had high cholesterol, but it had recently gone up. And given my training, I recommended that she be on a moderate intensity statin to decrease her cardiovascular risk by controlling her high cholesterol. And she said, Dr. Gordon, can you give me some time? And I thought, sure, okay. How much time do you want? And she said, can you give me a few months? So she came back to see me and had a repeat blood work results, and her cholesterol had gone down significantly. She told me about this book that she had read, and she started assuming a plant-based nutrition, trying not to use the word diet. And not only did her blood cholesterol come down, but it came down even more than I had anticipated. And I had always thought that I would get additional certifications, especially in obesity medicine. And so I went down that path and obtained my certification so that I was board certified in family medicine and obesity medicine. But that lady's story kind of stuck with me even as I transitioned into other positions. And I never heard about lifestyle medicine before, so I started venturing into, and I hear about these great pioneers who have been working in this field for years, but none of my predecessors, not senior residents, not attendings in medical school or residency, had ever even brought it up. And so from there, I went on to obtain my certification. And not only has it helped me in my own personal life, but my family, especially those family members who dealt with multiple chronic medical conditions, like I mentioned early on, as well as my patients.
So I remember hearing you talk about, I think maybe on another podcast, that your mother heard you speak, give a presentation about lifestyle medicine, and the penny finally dropped for her. She finally was like, "Yeah, maybe this lady I raised knows something."
Right. No, the penny finally dropped. So she did hear me speak earlier this year, and my mom has had type 2 diabetes for multiple years. My father did also, and she actually had a stroke, unfortunately, back in 2021, and she's doing pretty good considering what happened. But of course, she had additional medications that were prescribed to her, and she's never been one who really liked taking medicine. I mean, who does? But she did for several years, and she heard me speak, and it was like she didn't see me just as her daughter, Janel, but she saw me as Dr. Gordon. And you can't refute the evidence. And we watched a documentary, and then myself and another physician spoke afterwards, and that was back in February. And since then, she hasn't turned back. She still does eat some dairy, but she doesn't eat meat at all. And family members are like, don't you miss it? I mean, we just had a family cookout this weekend. And she's like, no, I don't miss it at all. I mean, I feel great. Her doctor has had to decrease the doses and frequencies of medicines. Some she doesn't even have to take anymore. So it really does help. And I often tell people this information is so great, like we just want to shout it out to the masses. But you have to figure out a way to tailor it to the person in front of you, whether that be a friend, a family member, a neighbor, or the patients who we're seeing day to day.
Well, isn't that really, that's the rub right there, because the evidence, it's that difference between knowing and doing. And every human, every family, every cultural group has a different mindset about some of these changes. And we all have a grandmother who smoked a pack or more of cigarettes a day, maybe not all of us, and lived to be 87 or something like that. We all know the outliers, and we can kind of cling to those stories when we're feeling a little under the gun and judged about things. So I think that what you said about there is evidence, and lifestyle medicine it's not just somebody's ideas. These are evidence-based methodologies and interventions that you're trying to put into people's homes, because that's where it happens, right? It's not happening in the office or in the hospital so much.
No, it happens at home. So they actually say that 80% of a person's health choices are not determined in the exam room. They're determined in their community, whether they have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, whether they even have transportation to obtain those products, and then what's actually going on in the home. And I would say throughout generations, because oftentimes patients will come in and say, oh, my father had this or my aunt had this. So am I going to have it? We have to break it down and say, this isn't necessarily a genetic condition, but the way we define heredity in this aspect is maybe you saw how your parents cope with stress, or you saw the foods that your grandmother made because maybe your grandmother was your caregiver. And so you in turn then prepare foods similarly for your family. And then we wonder why some of these chronic conditions are being passed through the generations.
Now, one of the things I do hear from people, because I think a lot of people are like, yes, lifestyle is something I have control over. I don't have control over the genes that my mom and dad gave me, but I do have control over maybe how I eat and how I move myself and the potential risk factors I expose myself to. And Other people will push back and say, well, aren't you kind of blaming the patient? Aren't you blaming their culture or their tradition? And is that really fair? So I think we can see both sides, but as a physician, how do you help people not feel shamed by choices we've all made in the past?
That's really good. So we have to be very mindful when we have these conversations, even when I'm interacting with my own family, especially older or more senior family members, because you don't want to offend. And we have to remember, if we're talking about my current generation and then my parents and grandparents, some of these individuals, they went through great periods of scarcity, right? So you had to clean that plate. They're used to making very large portions and they don't want to waste. But we have to remind ourselves that taking that and keeping that in mind, but translating it into today and maybe not preparing as large of portions and not filling our plate so much. And it's not pointing fingers. And if we let go of trying to be perfect or judging others based off of perfection, which doesn't exist, none of us will ever be perfect. I always emphasize with my patients, it's all about progress. So take some of that pressure off yourself and give yourself grace for the great strides that you have been able to make. Then I think we'll be able to get somewhere. So just sitting down and saying, hey, this is what I learned from my doctor, or bring it to your physician because they may not be as well versed with the field of lifestyle medicine. Hey, I read this online, and then we can have a discussion together and figure out how, again, we can tailor some of these recommendations to your own personal life or that of your family members, and not so much you feeling that you have to be perfect.
I think that's so true, because very often I think people are daunted by what they think they need to be doing and how far that is from what they're doing today. And you're here to say, in most cases, every step is helpful, not just getting to that final, I suppose, unless you're facing a very critical medical situation, right?
Sure. In some cases, we do need to act more rapidly, but if we're starting out, we notice that we have some elevated markers of disease, maybe your blood pressure started to creep up, your blood sugar average now has you in the diabetic range, not necessarily diabetic, then maybe we don't need to jump or leap so quickly, but we need to make gradual steps. And honestly, I try to emphasize that at all times, because the more gradual they are, the more realistic they are for you to achieve, and the more likely they are to be sustained.
I think I see that all the time, and I've seen it in my own life. That something that seemed impossible to be vegan in my whole life. It's somewhere in my 50s, I started just getting closer and closer, and then at one point it was just like, oh, that's actually very doable.
Yes.
We can't, but sometimes we have to prove it to ourselves that it's doable.
Exactly. And then you realize, okay, well, I did that, so maybe then I can do this. So I never thought that I could be vegan. I never thought that I would be assumed a plant-based nutrition. And I also try to be careful with labels, even though I did speak to vegan women, some for my own self and even for others, because you don't want to try to miss certain subsets of the population because they assume, oh, again, I have to be this perfect way, right? And we have to remember that vegan is a whole lifestyle, not necessarily just your food. And so then you have individuals in the vegan community who say, well, but they wear this or they use this. So that's why within lifestyle medicine, we try to focus on whole food, plant-based nutrition. But again, starting somewhere, adding more greens to your plate, getting up and standing at least every hour for so many minutes. I usually explain or recommend to my patients 10 minutes. And for people who say, oh my gosh, I had a patient one time and she was really hard on herself. She used to be an athlete when she was younger. And as we know, throughout life changes for hormonal reasons, because of time constraints, other obligations we may have, you're not able to move as much as you could, joint pain, et cetera. And so I told her, hey, 150 minutes of moderate physical activity does seem very daunting, but if we never start because we feel like we can't get there, then where will we be 6 months from now, let alone a year, 5 years from now? So even if you can do 10 minutes, that's what the studies show. That's better than doing nothing. And that can help save years off or add years to your life.
So I hope everybody's listening. If there's anything, and not just for movement, but any portion of these 6 pillars, and we're going to go through quickly the 6 pillars. Typically here we talk more about the whole food, plant-based sort of part of the pillars, but starting anywhere, adding more vegetables. Well, let's go through the pillars first, and then we can talk about how adding a little bit of attention to any of these 6 pillars is better. Much better. So they are, what are they basically? Nutrition, physical activity, stress management, sleep, getting better sleep, social connection, And what's this last one? I can't read my own writing. Managing risky behaviors.
Yes.
Mm. So
Yes.
movement in any of those 6 categories are better. And so we've talked a little bit about the nutrition portion, and you're saying adding fiber, adding greens, adding fresh whole vegetables. And so do you think that's the hardest one to get people to change?
Honestly, I think it depends on the patient. So, in my current practice model, I see a lot of patients from all throughout the world. And I know that you've heard of the blue zones, but maybe some of your listeners may not, or people who obviously have a following of you, they likely have. But who knows where this conversation will end up. So, we know that for some of the blue zone or all of the blue zone populations that are scattered throughout the world, some of those populations still ate some animal products, but the bulk of their daily nutrition was centered on whole plant-based foods, right? And so a lot of the patients I see today, that's how it is. And oftentimes, honestly, when they move to the United States, that's when they start noticing changes in their health. And so then we start to kind of get into, okay, well, so what were you typically eating? And then they come here and we say, you need to eat a salad because salads are the only healthy option, right, Michelle? No. There are other ways to get greens in. I love a great salad, but all salads are not created equal. And I had a patient recently who's from India, and he said, I went to talk to a certain team and they recommended this, and it just didn't sit well with me because it didn't align with the cultural foods that I'm used to that bring me comfort. So then we kind of worked together to figure out, okay, how can we tweak what you're eating and not make you feel like so restrictive to now it's foreign to what you're used to. And you're already in a foreign land, right?
I think that's great. The idea of, because you are treating with lifestyle medicine, we're reminding ourselves that we're treating the individual in his or her culture, their family, their work life. Everything has to be. A truck driver may have different changes possible for her than somebody who is on the beat, a police person, a police officer moving around a lot. So we have to take it all into account.
All into consideration. And then not just that individual, but what about the single mom who has to catch a bus and has 3 kids she's taking care of? One is in daycare, may have to take off work early to make it to visits or get to a supermarket, grocery store that's within a reasonable distance from her home, and then get back to pick up the children and feed them. So all of this has to be kept in mind. And that's why it's so important that we are allotted time in these visits, especially within primary care, to actually understand where a patient's coming from. So we notice, hey, we recommended this type of treatment during the last visit, the last 3, 4, 5, yet no changes have been made. And we just write it off as the patient is not adherent. But we actually got down to the nitty gritty of why? Where is this person in front of you coming from? What is their lineage? What is their culture? What are their time constraints, their stressors, et cetera?
And that does, as you say, that requires time. And if most of us only get 8 minutes with our primary care provider per every 6 months or a year or whatever it is, there's no way, right? There's no way we get that support.
Exactly. But changes are being made, and more and more of us providers are being more vocal, nursing is being vocal, and patients.
So patients are starting to get the message that there are other options to medication or just an inevitable decline or illness with age. So those six pillars, how do what's your kind of recipe? I guess that's a prescription, but we don't know the situation of anyone listening at home. We have no idea what their doctor has prescribed or not prescribed or what they've been told. But in general, lifestyle medicine, these are things we should all be asking our physicians about if we're not actually trying them at home. So you're talking about increasing whole foods, plant-based foods. And so what else can we do at home?
Sure. So I just will kind of talk through some of the foods I typically ate throughout my life cycle that I've made tweaks to.
Great.
So, everyone always thought yogurt was like the healthiest option, right? In I'd say the 90s, okay, when I was growing up, cereal. And it doesn't mean that you can't eat these foods, but a lot of the products on the market are not as healthy for you as we think. They may slam a sticker on it that says, oh, increased fiber, this amount of fiber, low fat, et cetera. But we have to be mindful when some of these claims are made. Then you have to really look at the ingredient list and figure out, okay, but what did they add in order to take that out or reduce that item? So we often focus on whole food, plant-based nutrition. So say you do want some yogurt. Obviously for myself and for people who want to assume a more plant-based nutrition, I would recommend a non-dairy item. But then the bulk of that meal could be some fruit, and you could add in some whole grain cereal and not some of this colorful, sugary cereal that's marketed to a lot of our children as a healthy breakfast option, which honestly is junk. And it's not great for us. And then we wonder why our children aren't able to perform as well at school, or why we get so tired quarter through the workday.
Of course.
Another item I used to eat is eggs, right? Everyone wants their protein. So I'll do a tofu scramble. And there are different ways to boost the flavors in these foods, because again, we may recommend this to individuals, and especially my patients coming from all over the world. Listen, they use all of these herbs and spices to season their food, and they want the food to taste good. So we can't just say, oh, eat this, and then it tastes like a piece of cardboard. It needs to be flavorful. So I'm actually working on my culinary medicine certification, and through that, I've learned how to add, obviously, fresh herbs and even some dried herbs to boost the taste of it.
One of the things I love with the tofu scramble is a little bit of kala namak, the black salt.
Yes, I had that this morning.
Is it? I mean, it really is. If you remember eggs with any kind of pleasure, I think the kala namak, the black salt, really can help a tofu scramble give that kind of sense that you remember that you liked about eggs.
Yes, and a little goes a long way.
Very little. Yeah, it's very, yeah, you don't want a lot, to be honest.
No. Because we want to watch that sodium also.
Absolutely.
Oftentimes we assume that breakfast has to be those historical breakfast type foods, but no, some people will do breakfast for dinner. And then I say, well, then, or BFD. And I say, well, how about dinner for breakfast? And sneaking in greens. So I always loved a good brunch. I did my residency in the DMV or DC, Maryland, Virginia area. And so when I wasn't working, and even oftentimes when I was post-call, just because you need to have a social life, social connection is one of our key pillars, I would go to brunch. And so at brunch, there's a nice spread of quote unquote breakfast foods and then lunch foods. So then I tell people, well, bring that party home. So, the salad you might see on a brunch buffet, add those leafy greens to your breakfast, be it within the tofu scramble, a side salad, adding greens to a sandwich, putting it in your smoothie. There are ways to boost your nutrition. And they don't have to be very costly.
Now, you just mentioned social connection. I do know a lot of the people I end up working with are, they find being very compliant with a whole food, plant-based lifestyle can feel at odds with their social connection, with the people in their families or community or colleagues that they're used to enjoying meals with. Tell me if you have some advice for people who are feeling a little bit like, no, we can't go to the ribs place we used to go to. We can't have brunch at the, with the IHOP or wherever, where we used to have pancakes and eggs together.
Sure. So that was honestly something that kind of was scary for me when I started transitioning back in 2020. And obviously we were in the thralls of the pandemic, but I'm the go-to person for where are we going to go out to eat. I'm always looking for the newest, hottest restaurants with what is the best menu options. And it was a struggle at first, but I thought there's no way I'm going to stop dining out, right, with my friends and my family. And these individuals are all over the nation, even world. So I found ways to speak with the wait staff, and that wait staff may speak with the chef to find ways. I found restaurants are actually willing to work with you. Now, you have to be respectful, and that may include respecting a restaurant that says no substitutions. But I oftentimes encourage individuals to preview the menu before they go, and then you'll know what you're looking for. Or maybe you offer the recommendations. A lot of my patients travel for work and they dine out with clients and colleagues. And I say, well, do you ever have the opportunity to choose the place? And then from there, you can pick and choose, okay, this place may have more plant-based options besides just an iceberg salad.
Yes, because Diet Coke, iceberg salad, and French fries are not a whole food plant-based. They're not what we're looking for.
And again, flavorful, right? Like we don't want our plate to be boring and you're looking around at everyone who you're dining with and it's like, wow, that looks great. And then just speaking about family, so one for like restaurants. So this weekend I had a lot of family in town, I said, for that barbecue or cookout. And one of my aunts was visiting and she hadn't been to this soul food restaurant that has been open for years and we go to. And it's served family style. So you share the sides and everyone picks their entree, which most of them are meat, but they have an option for a veggie plate. But again, the veggie plate has to be a part of the size that everyone shares. And so they're like, oh, let's get the macaroni and cheese, the sweet potatoes. Grandma wants the mashed potatoes and gravy. And my mom and I, who are now plant-based, and even though mom still eats some dairy, she tries to not as much. And I said, hey, we need 2 vegetables, like green vegetables. My aunt said, we don't need 2 green vegetables. I thought the more color, the merrier, and we do have to watch the carbs. It doesn't mean that you can never have mac and cheese. Obviously, you and I would recommend vegan, right? But we want to make sure whole is the majority of the plate. So those whole sweet potatoes, the whole greens, the whole green beans, and eating the rainbow.
Yeah. And not only for our cardiovascular health, but our gut macrobiota, correct? That makes a big difference in terms of our entire level of inflammation. Maybe talk a little bit about that we want to just push this home for everybody, that it actually is possible and it's important.
Yes. So everyone's hearing more and more about the gut microbiome, and it's a newer topic that's up for discussion. But what we do know is we have so many microbiomes, right, living within us, and we work mutualistically. So if the gut microbiome is not happy, then you might start noticing symptoms of bloating, flatulence, pain, abdominal pain, and oh my gosh, am I dying? I need imaging. Not necessarily. Let's pause. Let's kind of work through what you've been experiencing and then go from there. And even for those who assume a more whole foods, plant-based nutrition, for those individuals, we may have to tweak kind of what they're eating during certain times of their month for some females, or maybe the way or methods that they prepare the foods. So I've had some patients who may eat a lot of cruciferous vegetables. I myself like those, right? But sometimes they may cause us to be more gassy. And a good source of protein for us who eat this way, obviously, are our beans, legumes, and lentils. And so sometimes those can cause people to be more gassy. So I'm recommending increasing fiber. And they're like, oh, yes, but I don't want to have these problems. And so then I usually recommend a food diet when we try to figure out, okay, what can we eliminate here and see how you respond to it? And so on and so on. I actually sent that low FODMAP diet to a patient one time, and it doesn't say plant-based. This includes meat for individuals who are on low FODMAP. And so this individual was actually vegetarian, and she sent me a portal message. She said, Dr. Gordon, are you saying I need to eat meat? And I said, no. If you want to do that, then okay, but you're vegetarian. So this is just kind of like a general handout that's within our electronic health record. But for you, you may determine, okay, I notice when I eat this meal, I often have these symptoms. So let's switch out some of those items and see how your body responds. And it doesn't mean you can never eat those foods again. All of this is a learning process, and it shouldn't be as daunting as we make it. I tell patients you should enjoy it because you're determining what will work for you and your family, your schedule, et cetera.
Yeah, because none of this works if you can't do it long term. Right. I mean,
no.
So we need to. And one of the things, if somebody suddenly looks at their food and goes, oh, wow, there's really not that much fiber in my diet, I'm going to eat a lot of cabbage and cruciferous or beans. That might be a recipe for having a really unhappy tummy for a few weeks. So we want to maybe ratchet that up slowly, right?
Gradually. Yes.
Instead of saying, no, I can't eat beans or I can't eat Brussels sprouts.
Yes, gradually increase the fiber, making sure you're getting enough water and movement. All of that helps our gut, which in turn helps our whole body. And what you do may change over life, again, depending on your likes and dislikes, how the food availability is in your community, and so on.
It's a very dynamic process. And sometimes some of us don't have access to a physician as often as somebody who may work with you. How can we advocate for ourselves inside our medical team with our physician who may not really be pushing this? Some of our physicians, I think, are also very traumatized by how many of their patients have chronic conditions and want them to be well and think they'll take the medication. They're not going to make these behavioral changes and these lifestyle changes. So I don't think we want to condemn any physician who hasn't brought it up with us.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I read something recently just kind of dissecting the trauma that we do experience as healthcare professionals. So participating in a code if someone has been obtunded or unconscious, and they need CPR. And then you go from that room to another one, and you have this mother who may be bleeding out and possibly losing her pregnancy. So these are not normal events that we have to go through. And we definitely want people to be healthy. Giving them bad news that, hey, you have this chronic medical condition the way we've been historically trained. You're going to have this for life. You'll have to be on medication for life. Even like a cancer diagnosis, these are not menial things, right? And so give us grace as well. And now in the day that we live in, this digital age, there's so much information online and even misinformation. You have people in podcasts like you have, Michelle, people in back in the day chat rooms that are now like these Facebook groups and stuff. And I usually encourage patients, especially for those who don't have individuals in their local community or family who they can discuss these things with, join these groups. And then when you find this information, bring that to me so that we can discuss it together. Oftentimes patients feel like, oh, we can't bring it up because the doctor is going to recommend this. Like they only want us to take pills. So we can't talk to them about alternative medications or treatments, I'm sorry. And I encourage my patients to, especially where I am now. Again, my patients are from all over the world. And so a lot of them are used to Ayurvedic treatment. I have patients from the Caribbean, from African nations, from Asian nations, and that Eastern type of medicine that we are not privy to because it's not evidence-based, and there are different reasons for that. I'm not even going to try to cover that in this podcast, but how can we use that together? But for me, it's always going to go back to evidence-based. And even though if we're having a discussion, it should be a healthy educational discussion and don't feel like it's an argument or that we're trying to push our recommendation on you. Someone used that recently, like, oh, we're pushing this. And I thought, pushing what? No, I never want patients to feel like they're being coerced into any recommendation. At the end of the day, your health is your responsibility. You let us know what you're comfortable with, what's capable for your budget or your lifestyle, and we bring the recommendations based off of our professional expertise. And we work together doing shared decision making.
And that's part of helping people with their stress management is not so they feel safe speaking with their healthcare provider. So they feel that they can tell them everything about what's going on. And that's something for a lot of us, we're like, yeah, I'll tell them that. They probably don't need to know this other thing that I'm upset about.
No, we need to know.
Yes.
With time, as the relationship develops, because the more we know, and I often thank individuals. I don't even remember when I started that, but when people were sharing very vulnerable information with me, I literally looked them in the eye and say, thank you. I appreciate you for letting us know that, because it's only going to help us take better care of you. And that runs the gamut, because I'm in primary care of multiple things that have been shared with me, but it only is going to help us in the end. And so I wanted to get back to the whole food plant-based nutrition. So in addition to leafy greens, if patients are able to tolerate it with time, gradually increasing beans, legumes, lentils, for individuals who may be at high risk for cardiovascular disease or already have had, for example, like a heart attack, we usually try to recommend that they be mindful with some of those fattier fruits or protein options. So like the nuts and the avocados. I love a great avocado, but they do have fat, healthier fat than like a fried piece of meat, right? But still there is some fat. And so for those individuals, they may need to be more mindful. And that's why it's important to have this conversation with your provider. And for providers, I encourage them to take part in some of the free education that's available right now through the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, because the studies do show that our patients do better when we're assuming this lifestyle and we're more comfortable discussing it with them. And that doesn't matter if that provider may carry a little more weight on their frame or if they have chronic medical conditions that they deal with themselves.
Well, that's very important to know. And I think it's beautiful that you're telling people, thank you for being vulnerable and transparent, because you may not know that some of these things will help us fine-tune medication or fine-tune our ideas about what you can try and what you can do. So that I hope everybody heard that, because even I don't really want to discuss everything with my doctor.
No, none of us do. I mean, I'm a physician myself, and it can be uncomfortable, right? But it's very vulnerable information, personal. Maybe we've not shared with anyone ever, but this is something maybe you've been dealing with for years. And so once you start to develop that relationship, please let us know. Another thing I wanted to hit on nutrition before we kind of move through. I know we've kind of touched on some of the other
things
here and there, please. For dessert. So I was never a sweets person. Like growing up, again, I told you my father and my mother had diabetes, but my father had it for many years before my mother was even diagnosed. My grandmother had it. And honestly, every time they would buy the ice cream, like at the weekly grocery store run, by the time I wanted some, it was gone because I didn't eat it like that, like the rest of my family. Not necessarily because I thought it was bad. I just didn't have such a sweet tooth, but maybe because of the stress through my education and training to become a physician, I developed a sweet tooth. And it's like, gosh, am I going to have to give up my desserts completely? You know, trying to be mindful of this family history of diabetes or insulin resistance and trying to eat more healthfully. Well, a lot of times we talk about in lifestyle medicine, culinary medicine, like flipping that dessert. So maybe you're used to like a cheesecake or an ice cream sundae. So it doesn't mean that you can't necessarily have this at all. But again, like making the fruit the bulk of that meal and then adding maybe a non-dairy yogurt or frozen yogurt or ice cream. Or if you do still eat dairy, just decreasing the amount and again, letting the fruits shine through. And that's just one example.
Because after the first couple of bites, we don't get the same sense reward of a delicious.
Not at all. And I tell my patients that.
But I want to remind everybody to look at your Instagram page because you were recently traveling and
yes.
You did, so you're not just sitting in a monk's cell eating porridge, you know, you're really enjoying life.
No, I definitely believe in enjoying life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So you were recently in London and Paris. Where else? Was it just those two cities?
Just London and Paris. And I actually leave for DC Wednesday because I'm going to the International Conference on Nutrition and Medicine. And that's where I train. So I'll be meeting with friends and they're like, where are we going to eat, Janel? So I'm looking for restaurants now. If you have any recommendations or any of your listeners do, I'm all ears, even though I'm very familiar with the area, but there are always new places popping up. So yeah, I love to travel, but I want to eat good and I want to keep health in mind. And oftentimes, Michelle, I'm traveling with people who don't necessarily have the same lifestyle that I have. So finding out how we can choose and pick places that will suffice both of us. But at the end of the day, they know that I want it to be better for both of us, right? But it has to be tasty.
I saw some of the your recommendations in Paris, and one of my oldest friends it lives in Paris, and I'm like, why didn't you tell me about this place? I've never been there. I've never been there. I'm really looking forward to going next time. So this is still, that's one of the pillars, is having a great time, right? Still. Yes. Enjoying your life. That's going to reduce your stress. It's going to increase your social connection and risky behaviors. What counts under risky behaviors that we want to mitigate?
Sure. So that's cigarettes, alcohol, and drugs. And alcohol is a big topic, always has been. I think most of us understand globally that cigarettes are not good. Some individuals still struggle with that. And please meet with us. There are people who don't want to take some of the medications. I don't want to mention names, but there are other treatments that we can do. Oftentimes it works if it is alongside these medications, but if you're not open to that, just again, please have that conversation with your provider. Don't feel like you have to do it on your own. I'll meet with patients who will say, well, I'll just get the gun myself. And it's like, we can talk about this now, or if at another visit or between visits, just let me know, but know that we're here to help. And I think that's important from a provider standpoint or healthcare team, letting individuals know like, okay, you may not be open to it now. Do know at the end of the day, this is my recommendation. We will come back to it, but let us know when you are more open to it. And so alcohol is a big one right now. Actually, in Canada, they firmly stated that we cannot even recommend one drink for an individual. So it used to be that we would recommend no more than 2 per day for a male or no more than 1 per day for a female. And then a lot of times individuals got into, well, I'll just binge on the weekends, right? Oh, I'm not a daily drinker, doctor. Okay, but when you do drink, how many are you drinking? And so there are studies that show that it's protective, like a glass of red wine. And there was one study that came out that it didn't even matter the type of wine, like a beer you could drink and it was just as great for your heart. But for me, and for a lot of us, sure, there may be some benefits from a cardiovascular standpoint or a heart standpoint, but we really can't refute what's coming out regarding cognition, memory, and this increase in incidence of dementia that we've seen. And so for me, if there's something that I can do through my nutrition, physical activity, stress management, sleep, we are now saying it's like the 5th vital sign, that I can also help my heart and my brain and not lose my mind and miss out on memories with family and friends, not lose my job. Whereas with alcohol, sure, you might have a good time and maybe it's good for your heart, but that damage could start to be done to your brain. And my best friend since middle school, her mother had dementia, and watching not just the mother go through that, who was like another mom to me, but watching the family and them struggle with caregiving and living their own lives, raising their families, entering into their careers, it's difficult. And so knowingly doing something that could lead you to that, I wouldn't recommend it. But it's a tricky topic. And then obviously we do not recommend street drugs. I'm not even going to get into marijuana, but we just want to be careful with those and avoid them at all costs.
But again, something that if we are consuming alcohol, tobacco, drugs, either prescribed, maybe off-label usage or whatever, we want to just tell our doctors about it. This is not the time. Yes. You may not be telling other people about it, but tell your physician. They're not.
Tell us, right? Many of us have been there, and who knows what that person in front of you struggled with. And again, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, or as it's abbreviated, ACLM, we are not saying that you cannot drink alcohol at all. All of this is just recommending either increase in some of these more healthful foods, increase in your physical activity, better ways to manage your stress, and then decrease avoidance of these risky substances. But no one's saying like you have to eat only plants or you can never have alcohol again. We don't want to be too restrictive, too controlling, demanding, because it has to fit everyone's lifestyle.
And you're talking about what the evidence shows. You're not, if this is not your personal opinion, you're as a physician, you may have your own personal opinion for what you do, but this is the evidence that, and we want, that's what we want from our physicians, I think, is not to hide the evidence from us about some of these.
Yes, don't hide the evidence. That's good. No, you really have to be careful with your own opinion. And I try to, like, if patients ask me, well, what will you do? Well, I usually say, well, maybe our lifestyle is different. Our access to certain products is different. Some individuals don't live in safe neighborhoods where they're able to get out and walk around like we might recommend. So you have to be very careful. But if it's not asked explicitly of me, then I try not to. And other members of the healthcare team need to be very mindful of that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want everybody to feel safe talking to your doctor. And if you don't feel safe with your doctor, what should we do? If we're telling our doctor something and we really don't feel like we've been treated with respect or compassion or some kind of positive interaction, what's your recommendation, Dr. Gordon?
So for my patients, if you feel like there is a good relationship developing there or there was, please speak up. Now, when it's told more respectfully, it's better received, even in restaurants when you're looking for something different that may be on the menu in front of you. More respectful feedback is better received, but don't just not give the feedback because we're human also. We're grappling with our own sick parents or maybe a child who's having behavioral issues at school. So if you let us know where you feel like there was a misstep or you didn't feel that we were as courteous or caring, let us know. And there are options to do that within certain healthcare models anonymously. But for some, if you feel like, again, there was that relationship there, just tell us. And I'd like to have feedback in the moment, because if you come back months later, then maybe I don't even remember what was done, or maybe the nurse doesn't remember. But if you say it in that moment, I didn't appreciate that, or maybe you could have said it this way, then that's how we'll learn in the end. Because no person is perfect, so no doctor's office will be perfect, no restaurant, etc.
That's very beautiful. I'm glad you reminded us, because that's part of changing our lifestyles, is asking for what we want, which other people we have maybe have been decades and decades. We've never asked for something. And suddenly we're thinking they're not supportive, but they may not understand what we're dealing with. They may not understand what we want. They may not understand why we want it. So we need to advocate for ourselves a little extra. And that is uncomfortable in many cases. It's when we change our own behaviors. You talk about what we don't know what our physician's going through. A very short, abbreviated story. I had a gynecologist years ago who I got a very strange sense of her during an exam. And she called me a few days later and she said, I want to, if my affect was odd, I was examining, you just reminded me of it too. I was examining you because I've just recently been diagnosed with a gynecological cancer. And she said, and I'm now thinking all the people I could maybe have missed that on. And she goes, and it wasn't done well. And I don't think I had a great exam with you. And I want to apologize, but I want you to either come back or don't come back. But that was why I was kind of intense in this. And I was so moved by that because that was a lot of physicians don't reach out in a situation like that.
No, kudos to that physician. And I hope she's still with us and doing better than she was at that time. And it goes back to that trauma, right? So be that personal trauma, or like I said, going from one room to the next and just acting like we're okay. And we just gave really bad news to this patient or family in this room, and then we just store it, go to the next room. Like, that is not normal at all. So again, extending that grace to ourselves and others. Easier said than done in some circumstances, but just trying to be more mindful of that and where we may be coming from as a provider. But if we try to be more open with each other, then hopefully it will help for more smoother conversations and encounters.
Dr. Gordon, I think you've offered us so many ways to think about how we can advocate for ourselves, what options exist in the world, and that it's actually doable. A lot of us are very committed to the way we used to live and our choices from before, and we don't have to suddenly change our complete lives. We can work with our physician to make incremental change. How can people find you, find what you're teaching? What's a good way, or maybe find a lifestyle medicine practitioner near them?
Sure. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Janel Gordon, MD. And then if you're looking for providers to see if they're certified, you can go to the Lifestyle Medicine website.
That's great. That's great. I'm so pleased that you took this time out. I know you're a very busy woman. I know. I'm so glad.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that there are young physicians out there, moving through the ranks, bringing this kind of level of support to all of us. We're all going to need it. I'm on the demographic that's moving to the north side of the equation. And so I'm really glad that there are some young people out there, younger physicians that are experts and offering a lot of options for us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
So what did you think? What did you think of Dr. Janel Gordon? I personally think it's so encouraging to know that there are more and more physicians coming up through the ranks who are eager to help us implement strategies at home to support our health. Last week on the podcast, I was talking about vegan systems, and I think this is going to be more or less the focus for the rest of 2023 here, looking for the systems that we want to put into place that support our longer-term ethical, health, and environmental goals. And Vedge your best. Sometimes that means making a big change, but it also means not giving up when those big changes don't stick or don't work the way we thought. Knowing that physicians like Dr. Gordon are out there helping us with these 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. Do you remember what they are? The 6 pillars are a whole food, plant-based, predominant eating pattern, physical activity, restorative sleep, stress management, avoidance of risky substances, and positive social connections. Knowing that the science behind lifestyle medicine is there and the support of the providers does exist, I think this actually helps. Just knowing that helps that in many, many cases, our systems are a little bit more in control than we think. A little bit more in our control than we think. Which of those 6 pillars might present a particular challenge for you or for one of your loved ones right now? Where can we be a little more transparent also with our healthcare providers to help them help us? So many great nuggets in this conversation with Dr. Gordon. And I would really recommend that if you do nothing else today, that you follow Dr. Gordon, Dr. Janel Gordon, MD, on Instagram. And that's Janel Gordon, MD, Janel, Janel Gordon, Gordon, MD, on Instagram. Okay, my Vedge besties, you've had a lot. You've gotten a lot today. So where are your systems supporting your goals? Where can you tweak some of those systems? Sometimes even just getting a little more consistent sleep can make a lot of the other things on your to-do list so much easier. I hope that you guys will you will leave messages, you'll email me. Let's share some of the systems you've tried successfully and even some of the systems that you're struggling with. And let's all support each other this week. Okay? And until next week, Vedge your best. Vedge Your Best podcast production, music, and editing by Charlie Weinshank. Thanks, Charlie. Before you go, it would mean so much to me and the Vedge Your Best team if you would hit subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, or share with someone you think might be interested. Something about algorithms, it helps bump us up a little in the rankings, and that's the best way to help others find the podcast and for us to find our audience. So, until next week, make it easy and veg your best.